Awesome, thank you. For the recording, this is the Konflux Community Architecture Call. It's Tuesday, March 18th. We got 2 points on the agenda. Tim, if you wouldn't mind, would you go first?
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
So right now we provide attestations for the what the build pipeline does and how it does it. And we publish those in the registry. We also attach an SBOM, and the attestation includes the digest of that SBOM, so we can also trust that SBOM. We're looking at doing some work to modify the SBOM to include things that are known at release time. So we want to republish the SBOM effectively. When we're doing that, we want to re-attest it. So instead of being just a reference to an attached SBOM, we want to actually attest the entire SBOM. So first of all, that's our thinking of what our approach is. Does that make sense? But secondarily, if we're doing that, we're doing this re-attesting. Should we be thinking about attesting any parts of the release phase? Because there are steps that run in the release phase up until the actual point we're doing the Scopia copy. Should we be thinking about doing that, or should we deliberately not do that? I guess that's my discussion point. I put a link in there to Konflux 4134, which is where the work is.
Tim, is this something that are you envisioning? Is your question just related to that specific SBOM piece, or is it maybe some kind of attestation for the whole release process?
Well, I guess, I don't know. Is it possible to have, I guess I don't know what the options are when we want to attest the SBOM, whether we have to re-attest all of the things that were in the original attestation and replace it, or whether we can have a separate, smaller attestation which just includes the SBOM.
I think you can. The attestation that comes from the build process is of a particular predicate type from the in-toto attestations. It's the SLSA provenance attestation, and the SBOM predicate type is different. I think you can and should have a second different attestation that's not going to overwrite or replace the original provenance attestation. And for the release, there's a release type in the in-toto predicates that I haven't looked at the details of, but I can imagine it being useful as some sort of statement about, I, the release process, attest that I released this artifact to this location. When you were describing it, I feel like maybe it sounded a little bit like a salsa provenance description of the release pipeline instead of the build pipeline, which could be interesting. And I think that's probably not what this release predicate means, but maybe both could be useful. Did you have a use case in mind, Tim?
A use case for
the release attestation.
Oh, for including descriptions of what did we do in the release pipeline? Not really. I was more looking for, would it be a surprise if we didn't include those? I can't think of a use case, honestly.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of other things that are already a surprise. Like, for example, if you look at an imaging register that Red Hat.io now, it has the build time signature. It has the build time salsa provenance signed with the chains key. I think anyone consuming that, it's good to have that information, I think, but it's a bit confusing for, if you're an outsider looking at this information, you don't really know how to verify them because we don't expose the build time, signing keys. The other thing is the SBOMs that we provide. The recommendation now is to use SBOM attestations, and we don't do that. And I think doing that as part of the release, I think it makes a lot of sense. But that is just an attestation for the SBOM itself, not an attestation of how the SBOM was created.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Right, thank you. And I'll take a look through the predicates. Another thing just to note while we're here, something we plan to do is during the copy is omit the attached build time SBOM as part of like attesting the release time SBOM. We don't want to end up with both SBOMs being visible in the release repository. So if that sounds weird to anyone, then speak up now.
I don't think I understand. Did you say omit with an O or emit with an E?
O with an O.
Okay.
We'll leave it out. We
Yeah.
won't copy it across. If we can find how to.
I think that sounds fine. In the pursuit of transparency, it might be nice to somehow make it available, but I could see how it would be confusing for a downstream consumer to find two SBOMs. Which one do I trust? One should supersede the other, but Louis, it was when they attest the release time SBOM, they're going to not also copy the build time SBOM to the destination registry, so that as a downstream consumer of this, you'd look and you'd find only the release time SBOM, not any evidence or trace of the build time SBOM.
I think that makes sense. And if you do need to do that and you have enough access, you can look at the source of provenance, and they'll have the digest of the build time SBOM. So for auditing purposes, we can still get to it.
Mm-hmm. Is there any value in being able to rerun a conforma policy check on an already released artifact at its released location?
Yeah, that's tricky because not all the metadata associated with that image may exist in the new location.
Like the SBOM.
Like the SBOM, right? So maybe there's something we could do where you can look at the repo where the image exists, or it can have another mechanism to look at some sort of fallback to where the image was built into. I think technically that is in the source of provenance. So it seems possible. I just don't know how much work that would be.
Yeah, that's the only use case I could think of if you wanted to double check provenance or continuously check provenance later in use. If you deploy something to an environment, I imagine the mission controller that's continuously checking the conforma policy compliance of artifacts that are running on a cluster, and when you copied them to their destination location, they'd want to come with everything, including the build time SBOM if that was needed to make the check pass. I guess the policy could be modified to permit the release time SBOM instead of the build time SBOM. Yeah. Simon, sorry, you got your hand up.
Just out of curiosity, what kind of SBOM data is being added at release time that's not already available at build time? I'm just wondering.
So in the pearls for the thing you're releasing, there's an attribute called repository name, I think. And we want that to be the released repository that we're actually putting it into. So that won't be present when we build it. It might not even be known when we build it.
I see.
Things like that.
Okay, thanks.
We don't have any work planned out for this, but if you look at OpenSSF's reference pipelines for generating SBOMs, they break them into 3 or 4 stages. We first produce the SBOM, and then an augmentation stage and an enrichment stage. I forget what the last one would be, release maybe of the SBOM. But I can imagine, like, we need to introduce something like that at some point. Like, Cache 2 doesn't necessarily know the licenses of all the components that it's found, but it would be nice to have that in the SBOM. So do we break that apart into a second build, like part of the build phase, so that we identify all the components and then we cross-reference with some curated database? There's a couple options out there to populate licenses for all those, and then make that the build time SBOM. Or alternatively, we could factor that in as a part of the release pipeline. That, I guess, what are the semantics of that? The release process is declaring that it knows something about licenses. It wants to attest to the correctness of those license associations. That could make more sense at release time.
With SPDX 3, you get to say the relationship between two things in the SBOM, and any of those things may be another relationship. So you can be quite meta about who is saying what about which evidence and that kind of thing.
That's cool. That's cool, but maybe it's a little bit like we have a hammer, so it looks like a nail. You know,
Yeah.
So that's actually helpful for downstream consumers to have that extra, richness or whatever.
Right, I think that's what I had.
Cool, thank you, Tim. I had a point on the agenda, just briefly, an FYI, that we have a governance board, which we don't talk about very much, but the election cycle is coming up. My seat is expiring, I think, in May, and we've never held an election before, so we need to figure out how to do that. I don't know how. If anybody has experience with doing that in other communities, please reach out. I'd love to pick your brain about it, and maybe it would make sense to have somebody else drive the election processes on the community list. I've been watching the Tecton election that's ongoing now and thinking we just borrow and copy their tools for doing it. I know Fedora community has a bunch of resources for organizing elections, but a lot of those tools I think are bespoke to their infrastructure and their domain. Not that we couldn't use them, but. Cool, so that's my ask. Reach out if you have any ideas about it. Otherwise, if nobody steps up, then I'll try to drive something to make it happen. Stephen, you raised your hand.
Oh, I was just going to say that I agree on the bespoke part of the Fedora elections. I would use whatever Tecton is using since there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
But if worse comes worse, the OSAS group inside of Red Hat also has tools and people who are used to doing these sort of elections.
Cool. Great. Thank you for the tip. We're out of points on the agenda. I was kind of hoping Andrew would attend today and give an update on the docs party that we held on Friday. We made a lot of changes to the upstream docs, broke some links, but made some really, I think, significant improvements. I think he's going to send out an email about it to the public list soon, so look forward to that if it's not already out. Any other announcements, FYIs? No, we can wrap up. All right, let's do it. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Sorry we started late.
No problem. Thank you for running it so quickly.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks.